Before Ted Bundy, before Jeffrey Dahmer, Kentucky gave us a man so vicious, so utterly deranged, that even cannibalism was just part of a day's work. This is the story of Levi Boon Helm, a man born in the quiet hills of Lincoln County, Kentucky, who would grow up to become America's first cannibal serial killer. Forget the romanticized Old West. Helm turned the frontier into a bloody buffet, and he wasn't picky about what was on the menu. Born in 1828, Levi Boon Helm, who went by Boone, was raised in a Kentucky that was rural, religious and poor. His family were well-respected, hard-working folk. But Boone, from an early age, the boy had a wild streak, and not in a stealing an apple kind of way. He was violent, unpredictable, and had a disturbing fascination with knives. By his teens, Boone had developed a taste for chaos. He was tall, strong, and downright terrifying when he wanted to be. His favorite pastimes: drinking, fighting, riding horses like a madman, and making enemies. Boone got married as a young man, and shocker, he wasn't exactly husband of the year. His wife eventually divorced him, citing extreme cruelty. That was putting it mildly. He beat her, threatened her. One story says he tried to ride his horse through their house during an argument. Yeah, Boone's first official murder came after a dispute with his own cousin, Little Bree Shute. They were planning to head out west to California during the gold rush, but when Shute backed out, Boone flew into a rage and stabbed him to death in public. Not only did Boone not deny it, he bragged about it. Now, instead of fleeing the law, Boone actually turned himself in. But when he was transferred to a mental asylum to avoid a murder trial, he promptly escaped and began a new life on the run. And this is where things get weird. From 1850 onward, Boon Helm drifted west, leaving a bloody trail from Missouri to Utah, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana. He joined outlaw gangs, robbed travelers, and frequently murdered people he found inconvenient. When he wasn't killing, he was boasting about killing. In Oregon, he allegedly murdered a man for looking at him funny, then shot another just because he felt like it. And then came the cannibalism. Stranded in the wilderness more than once, Boone turned to, well, eating whoever was around. In one infamous case, he and a companion named Burton were stuck in the snowy Rockies. When Burton could no longer walk, Boone killed him, carved him up, and roasted his flesh over a fire. He later recalled, "It was good meat, and I was hungry." He didn't just kill to survive. In some cases, he waited for men to die, then dug up their frozen bodies and ate their thighs. One surviving member of a trapped party said Boone even licked his lips while talking about which part he'd eat next. One of Boone's most infamous moments came in Idaho, where he got into a fight with a man known as Dutch Fred. Now Fred was another rough character, but Boone was worse. During a heated argument, Boone pulled a Bowie knife and gutted Fred in the middle of town, then walked off like it was just another Tuesday. Locals had had enough. They sent word to Montana vigilantes known as the Montana Vigilance Committee, a group that was basically the Wild West version of Batman, minus the gadgets. Boone was finally captured in 1863 in Montana. His reputation preceded him. Everyone knew this guy was a killer, a cannibal, and an all-around maniac. During his trial, Boone confessed to over 10 murders, but showed zero remorse. In fact, he told the judge, "I've been a man of many sins, and I fear none of them." The court sentenced him to hang, and Boone made sure he went out with flair. On January 14, 1864, just before the trap door dropped, Boone screamed out, "Every man for his principles! Hurrah for Jeff Davis! Let her rip!" And just like that, the noose snapped shut on one of the most dangerous men the American West had ever known. Unfortunately, many of Boone's victims were never formally identified. He killed drifters, companions, rivals, people who were often undocumented, nameless, and forgotten by history. In a way, that makes him even more terrifying. His victims vanished into the wilderness, and into him. Modern psychologists believe Boon Helm likely suffered from antisocial personality disorder, or something even worse. He was impulsive, lacked empathy, felt no guilt, and enjoyed watching others suffer. But unlike many modern serial killers, he didn't hide. He bragged. He wanted to be feared. In the end, Levi Boon Helm became a legend, not because he was clever, not because he outsmarted police, but because he was proof that sometimes the scariest monster in the room has a name, a face, and an appetite. The 1920s. Jazz was booming. Prohibition was in full swing. And in Lexington, Kentucky, a city known for horse racing and bourbon, one crime would set off a chain of events so explosive it brought tanks into the streets. This is the story of Will Lockett, a man whose crimes not only devastated families, but nearly sparked a full-blown race war in the South. Let's take a look. Born Petrie Kimbrough in Pembroke, Kentucky in 1888. He would later adopt the alias Will Lockett, probably in an effort to dodge his long and ugly criminal past. Now, Lockett had a troubled life. Reports say he was abused as a child, and his upbringing was marked by poverty, racism, and instability. He served in World War I, and according to some prison records, he suffered from head trauma and possibly PTSD, though whether that explains or excuses what he did is up for debate. Because what Will Lockett did was horrifying. On the cold morning of February 4th, 1920, 10-year-old Geneva Hardman left her home in Lexington to walk to school. She never made it. Later that day, her bloodied body was found in a field. She had been bludgeoned to death with a rock. Her school books lay beside her. The town of Lexington went into a panic. A child had been brutally murdered in broad daylight, and the killer, no one knew. Yet, that is, until Will Lockett was arrested the same day. Police said he confessed on the spot, even showing them the murder weapon. But that wasn't all. In the following days, Lockett confessed to 3 more murders, all of them young women. He said he'd committed them across Indiana and Kentucky, dating back to 1912. The details were brutal: strangling, bludgeoning, sexual assaults. It was clear this wasn't a one-time crime. Will Lockett was a serial killer. Maudie Walker, Indiana, 1912, a 20-year-old teacher found strangled in a ditch. Anna Eliza Mitchell, Illinois, 1917. Lockett claimed he'd attacked her while she was walking home. Unnamed woman, Hopkinsville, Kentucky. A prostitute Lockett confessed to murdering, details scarce. Geneva Hardman, Lexington, 1920. The youngest and final victim. Her death would light the match. Word of the confession spread fast, and within hours, a white mob began forming outside the jail, demanding Lockett be turned over for a lynching. This wasn't your average angry crowd. This was thousands of people, including veterans, police officers, and city officials, calling for mob justice. And the governor? He wasn't having it. Governor Edwin Morrow called in the Kentucky National Guard, then the U.S. Army. Tanks were stationed around the jail. Machine guns lined the rooftops. Martial law was declared. Tensions exploded. On February 9th, the mob tried storming the courthouse. The National Guard opened fire. 6 white rioters were killed, dozens injured. Lexington had become a war zone, all to prevent a lynching. Now you'd think with all that chaos the trial would be a circus, but the state made sure it was fast, clean, and legal. Just 3 days after Geneva's murder, Lockett was in court. He pleaded guilty to her murder, and the judge sentenced him to death by electric chair. It was one of the quickest capital trials in Kentucky history. On March 11th, 1920, just 5 weeks after the crime, Will Lockett was executed at Eddyville State Penitentiary. Reports say he walked quietly to the chair, no final words, no remorse. Lockett's psychological records are thin, but what we do know is chilling. He claimed to hear voices. He was obsessed with violent urges and had zero empathy for his victims. Modern experts believe he may have had antisocial personality disorder, possibly combined with trauma from war and early life abuse. In short, he was broken long before Geneva Hardman crossed his path. But does that excuse what he did? Hell no. The Geneva Hardman case left scars far beyond her family. The riot in Lexington became one of the first times in US history that the military was used to stop a lynching. Newspapers across the country covered it. Some praised the governor, others accused him of protecting a killer. But it set a precedent. The law would be followed, even when the mob howled. As for Geneva, her funeral was attended by thousands. She was buried with honor. Her death became a painful symbol of lost innocence in a city teetering on the edge. In the end, Will Lockett died a convicted murderer. But the consequences of his crimes stretched far beyond one jail cell. They tore a city in two. And now, 100 years later, his name is mostly forgotten. But the riot, the tanks, and Geneva's little school books are still remembered. If you've ever stayed alone in a motel off the highway and felt that gut feeling that something just wasn't right, you were probably right. Because for 3 long years, someone was hunting women along Interstate 65. He moved at night, struck fast, and left nothing behind but death and silence. This is the story of Harry Edward Greenwell, born in Louisville, Kentucky, a church-going handyman by day, and the eye to 65 killer by night. Harry Greenwell was born December 9th, 1944, in Louisville. He grew up in a blue-collar household. Dad worked the rails, Mum kept the house. Nothing really screams future serial killer. But as he got older, cracks started to show. He had a history of petty crimes, including burglary and assault, and spent time in juvenile detention. The guy couldn't seem to hold a job or a relationship for very long. Still, by the 1980s, Greenwell was seen as a mostly harmless oddball. He was married, worked as a railroad laborer, even volunteered at church in Iowa. No one suspected a thing. But the real Harry, he was quietly planning nighttime hunting trips across state lines. On February 21st, 1987, Vicky Heath, a 41-year-old motel clerk in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, clocked in for her overnight shift at the Super 8. She never clocked out. The next morning, her body was found behind a trash dumpster. She had been raped and shot in the head, execution style. No fingerprints, no DNA leads, no security cameras, just a stunned community and a grieving family. Police suspected robbery, but the violence didn't match the cash draw. Something darker was going on. 2 years passed. Then came March 3rd, 1989, a day now seared into true crime history. In the early hours, Peggy Gill, 24, was working at a Days Inn in Merrillville, Indiana. A few hours later, and 80 miles away, Jean Gilbert, 34, was behind the front desk at a Days Inn in Remington, Indiana. By the end of the day, both women were found raped and shot to death in nearly identical circumstances. Both worked night shifts. Both were shot with a .22 caliber handgun. Both motels were right off I 65. Both cash drawers were emptied, though barely. This wasn't random, it was a signature. The FBI was brought in. Profilers suggested a white male, mid-30s to 40s, highly mobile, possibly a trucker or railroad worker, someone who blended in, but there was no name, no suspects, and the killings stopped. In January 1990, a fourth woman was attacked at a motel in Columbus, Indiana. Same MO, night shift, remote location, robbery, but this time, she survived. She later gave police a composite sketch of the man, white with bushy eyebrows, deep-set eyes, about 5 feet 9 inches and wearing a flannel jacket. His demeanor, calm, cold, almost robotic. This was their first real break. But without DNA, it was still a dead end. The case went cold again. Who was Harry Greenwell, really? Behind the mask, Harry was living a quiet life in Iowa. After 1990, he remarried, worked various jobs, and even received commendations for his community service. At one point, he even donated to his local fire department, but his criminal past still bubbled under the surface. He had served time for burglary and assault. He'd escaped prison twice, and though his wife claimed he'd turned his life around, old police reports suggested he was violent behind closed doors. Then, in 2013, he died of cancer at age 68. No one knew he'd taken his darkest secrets to the grave. Or so he thought. The DNA breakthrough. 2022. In 2019, the FBI and Indiana State Police took another look at the I-65 case using genetic genealogy, the same technology that nailed the Golden State Killer. They took old DNA samples from the crime scenes and uploaded them to public ancestry databases. Matches started to form, family trees were traced, and then it all pointed to Harry Edward Greenwell. In April 2022, investigators made the announcement, "We are 99% certain that Harry Greenwell is the I-65 killer." And just like that, a decades-old mystery was solved.
Message is, you might be able to hide for a while, but we're going to find you, even if you're not here.
After more than 30 years of searching for a serial killer with ties to cases in Kentucky and Indiana, investigators say they have identified the killer. The man, now tied to 3 murders and 1 assault, possibly even other cases, is Harry Ed Greenwell, a Louisville man with a lengthy criminal history.
Any type of evidence that they might find, anything that might be broken, anything that might be tore up, or any piece of evidence or any piece of property that the person might have left.
1989, right off I-65 in Hardin County at a Super 8 motel, Vicki Heath was working as an overnight clerk on the night police say Harry Ed Greenwell robbed her, raped her, and shot her, dumping her body behind a dumpster. Detectives responded early and stayed late, collecting evidence.
Anything that we think 2 or 3 weeks down the road or a year down the road that we might need.
They thought they might need it in a few weeks or a year and preserved it, not knowing then that more than 30 years later, that evidence would be used in a scientific breakthrough, leading police to the serial killer responsible for Vicki's death.
This case really highlights the generational dedication of the Elizabethtown Police Department. Our detectives take each case personal, and they never lose faith. They never give up hope that one day their case will see closure.
Tuesday morning, a big announcement. Local, state, and federal investigators worked together to breathe new life into the cold case, using investigative genealogy to identify Greenwell as the serial killer, a 99.999% match, according to police.
I hope that today might bring a little bit of solace to you, to know that the animal that did this is no longer on this earth.
Police say Greenwell had a lengthy criminal history, even escaping from prison more than once. According to his obituary, he was born in Louisville in 1944, died of cancer in Iowa in 2013, and still has family in the Louisville area. He is Peggy Gill, Vicki Heath, and Jean Gilbert. Jean's daughter was there for the announcement of her mother's murderer.
We'll never know what the killer was thinking. We'll never learn any of the whys of his actions. And that's just where we sit today.
She says her family finds some closure in the announcement after 30 years of wondering, but detectives say their work isn't done. They believe Greenwell, the I-65 killer, could be responsible for more murders, more assaults across the Midwest.
Too late for justice, but not too late for answers. Let's not forget the women whose lives he ended. Vicki Heath, 41, a mother of 2, just trying to make ends meet with a motel job. Peggy Gill, 24, known for her kindness and smile. Engaged to be married, Jean Gilbert, 34, a single mom, working nights to support her daughter. Unnamed survivor, still lives today, forever marked by that night. These women weren't just victims. They were people with dreams, families, and futures. All taken by a man who looked harmless, but was anything but. Greenwell's exact motive, unknown. Some say he targeted women working alone because they were easy prey. Others point to a possible hatred toward women, stemming from past relationships. But what stood out most was his precision. He always targeted motel clerks, struck at night, moved quickly and cleanly, took little money if any, left behind no evidence except DNA. He was methodical. And then he stopped. Some theorize he had a moment of conscience. Others think his health declined. Or maybe, just maybe, he knew he'd pushed his luck long enough. For years, the I-65 killer haunted the highways. He moved through states like a ghost. No name, no motive, just bodies left behind. And even after death, he hid in plain sight. But thanks to science, perseverance, and DNA, the victims now have names. And so does their killer. Louisville, Kentucky. The year is 1983. The city's dealing with rising crime, racial tensions, and crack-era chaos beginning to brew. But in the middle of a long, hot summer, someone is stalking young women. He watches, he waits, he strikes, and within just a few weeks, 3 women are dead, each one found shot in the head, execution style. The man responsible, Larry Lamont White, a name that should have stayed buried under a prison forever. But this one comes with a twist. He was paroled, and only years later, DNA dragged him back into the nightmare. Let's unpack this one, because it's infuriating. Larry Lamont White was born March 30th, 1958, in Louisville, Kentucky. Raised in a poor neighborhood, Larry was one of 7 kids. His father walked out early, and by 13, Larry was in juvenile court for theft and assault. Teachers described him as quiet but brooding. By high school, he'd dropped out and joined a street crew known for burglaries and armed robberies. By 1981, at age 23, Larry had already served prison time for robbery. And he wasn't interested in turning his life around. Instead, he was about to become a serial killer. Over a 4-week stretch in June and July 1983, 3 women were murdered in eerily similar fashion. Their common link? All were young black women in their 20s. All were found naked or partially clothed. All had been shot in the head, close range, with a .32 caliber pistol. All were last seen in West End, Louisville, Larry's stomping grounds. Let's go victim by victim. Pamela, 22, was found in a vacant lot on West Kentucky Street. She had been raped, shot in the head, and dumped like garbage. She was known to police only because of prior drug arrests. The media barely mentioned her death. Police found no witnesses, no DNA technology existed at the time, and the case went cold. Just 3 weeks later, 22-year-old Yolanda Sweeney, a University of Louisville student, was found shot in the head near railroad tracks not far from her home. This case got more attention. Yolanda was popular, had no known enemies, and her murder stunned the community. Still, no suspects. Deborah Miles, 24, was found murdered in an alley. Same gunshot wound, same pattern. Police began to think they had a serial shooter, and they were right. Then came the break. In July, a woman named Sharon Johnson came forward. She said she'd survived an attempted rape by Larry White, who tried to shoot her, but the gun jammed. She got away and gave police a full statement. White was arrested. Ballistics matched his gun to the Sweeney and Miles murders. He was charged with 2 counts of murder and 1 attempted rape. Oddly, the Armstrong case was left out. There just wasn't enough to tie him to it. Yet. In 1985, Larry was convicted of both murders and sentenced to death. The courtroom was packed. Victims' families cried. Larry didn't blink. He was cold, arrogant, and emotionless the entire trial. For a moment, it felt like justice had been served. Spoiler, it hadn't. In the early 2000s, Larry's attorneys appealed. They claimed his confession had been coerced. The jury hadn't been properly instructed. His lawyers were ineffective. The appellate court agreed. In 2003, his death sentence was overturned. He got a retrial, but the prosecution offered a plea deal for second-degree manslaughter. And in 2007, Larry White was paroled. Yes, you heard that right. A man who executed 2 women. walked free after 24 years. But karma, it has a long memory. In 2006, cold case detectives retested evidence from the Armstrong crime scene, and this time, DNA technology came into play, and boom! Larry White's DNA was all over the victim. Now they had him for the first murder, the one that was never tried. He was rearrested. The trial began in 2014. This time, prosecutors went all in. The jury took one look at the DNA, the cold case files, and Larry's criminal history, and gave him what he should have gotten decades earlier: death. Again.
Which makes it official. A convicted serial killer is being sent to death row. The judge upheld a jury's recommendation for Larry Lamont White, bringing a 30-year cold case to a close. WLKY's Ann Bowden has been covering the proceedings. She joins us now with reaction. Ann?
Well, Vicki, Judge James Shake said that he could have gone his entire career without having to deal with a sentence like this one. But he said after he heard the evidence during trial and he heard the jury's recommendation, he had no choice under the law but to keep the death penalty against Larry Lamont White. And
you snatched away a woman that embraced us with all she had. You left me hopeless, unwanted, afraid to live. So really, you left me dead. That poem was wrote when I was 12. Lost with no direction. Hurt with tears falling from my heart. I didn't know which way to turn, but seeking God was a start.
family members of Pamela Denise Armstrong addressed the court Friday morning as the man convicted of killing her was sentenced to death. Larry Lamont White had his own words to say.
To the family. I don't know what y'all heard here to say that I committed the crime, but I never committed it. And I don't care how you look at it, but this was set up by the Commonwealth.
Police say in 1983, White raped and killed the 22-year-old mother by shooting her twice in the head and leaving her body in an alley. Nearby, food stamps scattered for her 5 young children, who, now adults, sat in the courtroom. The case went cold until Lavon White, Armstrong's daughter, and no relation to Lamont White, urged LMPD to reopen the case in 2004. It led to a new trial and a conviction.
I could discuss how I have lived trapped in fear for pretty much my whole life, but I won't. I could discuss how I have been unable to sleep peacefully for the past 30 years, but I won't. I could discuss growing up feeling like I was a total outlier and not belonging to anyone because my mother was not here and was taken away from me, totally ripped away from me, but I won't.
The judge upheld the jury's recommendation, a 20-year sentence for the rape and death for the murder. For her son, the conviction brought back a peace he didn't have as a child.
But I have a burst of energy like a 5-year-old little boy who's at a playground. Every day I wake up, I feel like I have a reason to live. I feel like I have a purpose to live.
According to mental health experts at trial, Larry White displayed classic signs of antisocial personality disorder. Toward women, sexual violence, impulse control issues. He viewed women as disposable. Even when arrested, he seemed bored, not guilty. And the fact that he killed again after being paroled, that says it all. Larry Lamont White is now sitting on Kentucky's death row, awaiting the execution that should have come 40 years ago. He had a second chance at life, and he used it to hide a third murder.